are in the Sermon on the Mount. We've arrived at the section in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus starts giving specific directions. And today's is going to be on loving your enemies. On the one hand, this is a very simple sermon because the word love has not changed much over the centuries. Enemies, surprisingly, means the same thing as it did today as it did 2,000 years ago. It seems human beings have enemies. It seems we get on each other's nerves, we bother each other, we oppose each other. As long as there's been people, there's been things we do wrong to each other. So loving your enemies as a concept really hasn't drifted much over the centuries. It means pretty much the same thing today as it did 2,000 years ago. So on the one hand, this is an easy sermon. Here's what God says, love your enemies. The hard part is, most of us, myself included, don't like the direction. We don't like the command to love our enemies. And we have a variety of reasons. Some of us might agree that some of your reasons and my reasons may be reasonable. But it doesn't change God's direction. We are supposed to love our enemies. When we hear this command, love our enemies, we often put up defenses. We often come up with reasons not to follow. We come up with excuses for why this particular person is an exception. I can love all those people, but not this one. And so on this part, it becomes a little harder to talk about what Jesus is saying. Because of our natural tendency to, if we disagree with somebody, we metaphorically close our ears and we don't want to listen. It's a common thing we humans do, but it still doesn't change God's direction to love our enemies. Last time we talked about how Jesus gave direction, let your yes be yes, if you know, you know. We said that Jesus had talked about no murder, no adultery, no oaths. There's an interesting thing about that no. Oaths that can be called back to today as part of Jesus' direction about loving our enemies is that we're supposed to bless other people. There's going to be this transition where what we've read so far in Matthew 5 was a bunch of don'ts. Don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't get angry, don't lust. There was a whole bunch of don'ts. But now this end of Matthew 5, Jesus starts shifting over to do's. You need to do this. You need to start loving each other. And one of the do's is to give a blessing to others. So if you don't like to love your enemies because you have reasons, because of history, personal experiences, I can understand that, and you're going to let your mind wander. Let your mind start wandering onto, okay, what does blessing look like? So we'll come back to it. So we go through this. The next time I have the opportunity to talk about the phrase Jesus refers to, you have heard it was said to men of old, eye for an eye. We're going to talk about that. Because earlier when Jesus said, you've heard it was said to men of old, do not murder. We all understand what murder is. Do not commit adultery. We all still know what that means. But the phrase eye for eye might not be one we use very often. So we're going to take a little bit of time to talk about it. We'll then read Jesus' direction where he says not to resist an evil person. How difficult it is for us to follow that. We understand what the word can do not resist. We understand exactly what every word means. There is no deep spiritual meanings that are somehow opaque to us. We understand what it means. We just don't like it. So we're going to talk about Jesus' command not to resist. And then we're going to end with the title drop. The focus is loving our enemies. So let's go for eye for eye. The phrase eye for eye often gets misused. We often will use it as some sort of vengeance or justice statement. We will often, if you use the phrase eye for eye, it's common. This is one of Jesus' more well-known phrases, and it's known outside of Christianity as well. If you were to say the phrase eye for eye in China, the vast majority of people there are going to recognize it. This is a well-known statement. But one of the things that eye for eye it only occurs two different places in the Old Testament. Realize if you pull up your concordance or you pull up your app, it'll say 3, but that's because Deuteronomy is just a repeat of what it was said in Exodus. It's 2 different specific laws, 2 specific areas of justice where eye to eye comes up. And in both times, it is supposed to limit, ready for your big fancy word today, retribution. Retribution is not a word that we commonly use with each other. I'm not making fun of anybody if you're not using that in your regular conversation. I'm simply acknowledging this isn't a word we typically use. Retribution is getting somebody back. And the phrase eye for eye is actually a much longer phrase, as we're going to see. When God talks about in Exodus 21 and later in Leviticus 24 about eye for eye, what he's telling us, what he's telling the Israelites at the time and us going forward, is that there must be a limit on justice. That you cannot do whatever you want, whenever you want, just because the person is at your mercy. You cannot do whatever you want, whenever you want, to someone who is in jail as a prisoner. There are limits on what can be done. So let's look at Exodus 21. If men, what's interesting, the English word is translated as fight, the Hebrew word here is struggle. So think of either a wrestling match or think good old fisticuffs. It's good old about fisticuffs, but that's the phrase. When men struggle and hurt a woman who is with child, so that her children come out. I think the English translates this as a little more politely, so she gives birth premature. But it's when men are struggling, they whack a woman who's pregnant and the baby comes out of her. That was the specific situation being described here in Exodus. Okay, those of you who have gone through childbirth, pleasant experience? Big fan, 5 stars, great. You'd like to do it again? No? I have to ask. I cannot call personal experiences here. Fun experience? Okay, so this specific event, this is a forced delivery. Violence has been done on this woman, and the baby is forced out. So, what are the adjectives the woman is feeling at this point? Grief. Pain. Oh gosh, did you hurt my baby? Men struggle, hurt a woman so that her children come out. Yet no harm. Harm to who? The baby, the mother. Yet there is no harm to either the mother or the child. Okay, so the men are fighting, they whack the woman, either on purpose or accidental. She goes immediately into delivery, and the baby comes out. That's a problem according to Exodus 21. No violence. Violence, there's punishment. But there's no harm. He, whoever whacked the woman, he shall surely be punished. Okay, no violence. Violence bad. You haven't gotten this theme yet from the Old Testament. This is reported over and over again. No violence. Violence bad. He shall surely be punished according as the woman's husband imposes on him. And if we stop right there, it sounds like the woman's husband can do whatever he wants in vengeance back. But it doesn't stop there. There are limits. And he shall pay as the judge determines. So if 2 men are fighting and one of the men hits a woman, the woman has a premature delivery, there can be a fine. Money, animals, clothing. There can be a fine as they see fit. A fine. But, continue on to the next verse, but if any harm follows, now it's different. So if there's no harm, there can be a fine. And notice there's no limit put on it. There's not a limit on saying how valuable a human life is. But if there is harm, if any harm follows, the mother or the child, then you shall give, now is the phrase we've heard, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe. So if the baby comes out with a broken arm, what is the worst you shall do to the person who hit the woman? A little louder? Break the arm back. Okay? Two men are fighting. They have some sort of torch, and they burn the woman. Baby comes out early. What is the worst punishment you can do to the person that hit her with the torch? Burn him. This is a limiting statement. Those of you who are familiar with justice systems know that this is the fullest most of the time. There's a phrase we use, extenuating circumstances, so that you don't punish the full extent of the law. But that's it, no more. So this phrase, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, stripe for stripe, is no more. The traditions that God laid down with the Israelites was to limit damage. God multiple times says how much he dislikes violence. And what he doesn't want is to have some excuse to have violence on with each other. Well, he hit me first, I get to hit him back. No, that's the upper limit. No more. There was also the idea that there's supposed to be one standard, one measurement, one ruler, not ruler like king, but ruler like a rod. One ruler, that maybe not meaning anything for people as well. But there's one measurement that everyone follows. At the time when Leviticus was written, there were different social classes. There was nobility, there were slaves, there were servants. And each one were used to having different privileges or different obligations. And God says there's only one law. If you're rich, you don't get away with stuff. If you're poor, you don't get hurt first. It's all the same standard. From Leviticus 24, the word is mishpat, one standard. What it is a measuring rod. It is a constant rod that you use to measure. It's the same one, whether it's on a peasant's house, on a slave's house, on a noble's house, it's the same measurement. Everyone has to follow the same rule. If a man causes disfigurement of his neighbor, what a fancy phrase. I walk up to Steve, I break his nose. That's disfigurement. Okay? He no longer now is pretty because his nose is crooked. Disfigurement. As he has done, so it shall be done to him. Here's the phrase again. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. As he has caused disfigurement of a man, so shall it be done to him. No more. No more than that. There's a common phrase. They hit you once, you hit them back 10 times. They bring a knife to the fight, you bring a gun. They bring a gun, you bring 5 guns. That we do what's called disproportionate retribution. And people or countries or tribes with power will use that, and they'll make the war taunts and other phrases. Say, you hurt us, we will hurt you worse. God says, no. That's human. That's human vengeance. That's not God's justice. So if we keep going. As he caused disfigurement of the man, so it shall be done to him. Whoever kills an animal shall extort it. Whoever kills a man shall be put to death. Same things, no worse. You shall have the same law for the stranger and for one from your own country. So before I read that last phrase, so it doesn't matter if they're an alien. Please don't think green skin with probing cows or that. When we talk about alien, we mean foreigner, stranger, immigrant. One law. Now, I'm intending to get into social commentary today. I'm not intending to grab into political science today. I want to talk about Matthew 5 and how we're supposed to live. But God's wisdom is you have the same rules for everything. The same rules. So this standard is what the Israelites were supposed to follow. The same standard. Now, what's interesting, at the time we're reading in Matthew now, this would be a little over 1,500 years later. Are the Israelites under the same laws as the Romans? So you know your history, you know the answer is no. But the Romans had certain privileges that the Israelites didn't. The Romans could do certain things that the Israelites couldn't. But yet Jesus will take this eye for eye, tooth for tooth, with the understanding that in the Jewish culture there was supposed to be one rule that applied to everybody. And now Jesus says, not to resist. Now that's interesting. So Matthew 5:38, you heard it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. Calling back to that standard of no excessive judgment, which is not how the Romans did. The Romans were very much, you read their pillars, you read their laws, you hurt us, we hurt you worse. So the people that Jesus was speaking to could very much say, they started it. Yes, the Romans did. Eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. And so we don't like that phrase. We don't like that, don't resist an evil person. All sorts of objections come up. What if this was happening? What if that was happening? What if someone broke into your heart? Let's be reasonable. Let's talk about what crime looks like today where we live. Okay, let's destroy 2 myths about crime right now so that we can hear what God is saying. Your head is filled with certain things about crime. Let's knock them both down. Let's knock down both extremes. Okay? So let's do some crime stats. These are boring. I'll go through them quickly. But the goal here is let's get rid of some myths so that we can talk about what God is actually saying. Okay. Violent crime from 1990 to 2022. Okay? I realize it's on the screen. It's a little distant. It's a little fuzzy. This is number of crimes in the United States per 100,000 people. It's convenient. Back in 1990, it started at 730, and in 2020, it's at 385. Okay, so for the United States, we have 350 million people. It's not hard to do the math to see that, oh, we're talking about in the United States, we have thousands of violent crimes every day, every year. These are our stats. But to put it in some sort of population check. In 1990, 0.7% of the population had violent crime done in a year. Let me repeat that again. The entire population of the United States, 0.7% every year had a violent crime done. Not 10%, not 1%, 0.7%. That rate has steadily gone down from 1990, when it was at its peak, to 2022. I'm doing 2021 just to keep a good 30 year. It's down to now 0.4%, 385, 100,000. It's 0.4%. Now, we decry every act of violence. God is very clear. He detests violence. If you think God enjoys violence or his people enacting violence in other people, please go back and read Noah. God has very strong feelings on violence. So I'm just assuming that everyone knows that. We're stating that very clearly. God does not like violence. If you have a theological issue, we can talk about that later. So let's just accept that for right now and move on. God does not like violence. And so, according to God, even 385 per 100,000 is too many. It's 385 too many. But let's be realistic about the crimes. The likelihood is almost everyone here today could go their entire life and never have a violent crime done. I am not trying to dismiss that you personally have been a victim. Please understand, I'm not dismissing that. Please also understand that when we talk about violent crime, there's a difference. If someone holds me up at gunpoint while I'm in Chicago and demands my phone and my wallet, and someone does sexual assault, we understand these are separate crimes and they have different consequences. And please, no one feel that I'm trying to diminish the evil that is around us. But I do want to point out a perspective. Most of us will go through our lives and never experience it. Now, am I trying to imply that that everything is beautiful, that there is no such thing as violence in the world around us? So that's the one myth I'm telling. Look, I had this discussion with others. I had someone say in all seriousness, I'm going to protect my family. Do you live in a neighborhood where there's violent crime? When's the last time when someone broke into you? Look, growing up, I did have someone break into my house multiple times. Okay, I have had the gun point. I have had the okay, I have gone through this. So I'm asking, when's the last time that happened to you? Oh, never, but I've got to be prepared. Like, okay, look, violent crime is not that prevalent in this country. It really isn't. Except for certain geographies. So let's look at where we know, those of us living here, we live close to an urban center. Question, what's the urban center we live near? Chicago. Where are you most likely to be robbed, assaulted, shot? In New Lenox, Manhattan, or Chicago? In Chicago. So let's put up the stats of actually Chicago. So, city Chicago. I have a map here of violent crime in Chicago. This is from 2010, same time period as the last stat. I want to show these stats at the same time. Same time. Okay? You'll notice there are two concentrations of red. This is where most of the violent crime occurs in Chicago. On the south side, that's Englewood. That's Englewood, that's East Englewood, that's Fuller Park. On the west side, that's Garfield, West Garfield, East Garfield. Those deep red ones, when you look at the crime rate, we take how many crimes occur each year versus the population, there's more than half. Though obviously some people are victims of multiple crimes at once. But for example, if we look at Englewood, let's see Englewood, not the one on the side over here, the south, one of the ones, the dark red one in the south. Englewood is a population just under 23,000, 22,800. There were just under 14,000 violent crimes in 2023. That's over half. So there are two zones in Chicago where there's almost half the number of violent crimes as there are. So this is why I said, let's be honest. Let's get rid of two myths about crime. If I go downtown Chicago, what's the likelihood I'm going to get robbed, stabbed, shot? Really not that much different from it. It really isn't. If I'm working in Englewood, it's a different story. If I'm working in Garfield Park, it's a different story. There are certain areas where there is violent crime. And again, my goal today was not to talk about political science. It is not here to talk about crime theory. That is really beyond my scope, my training, my experience. But I would point out that the human methods that we've applied for the last 30 years, higher incarceration rates, longer prison terms, it's not working. It's not working. I believe Jesus' message is the only thing that actually is going to work. And I'm not doing this simply as some naive idealist. We have poured millions of dollars into human programs. They don't work. We can view the success of the business system. We can look at different gang and poverty issues in these two areas. I genuinely believe the only thing that's going to make a difference is Jesus' message. And unfortunately for us, Jesus' message is uncomfortable here. Jesus' message is, don't resist an evil person. The people living in those neighborhoods have evil people. And Jesus' message is, don't resist. Now, the more picturesque version that Jesus goes with, we look at Matthew 5, that most of us are familiar with. Matthew 5, 39 to 41. But I tell you not to resist an evil person. Before I go any further with that, let us be honest, let us be reasonable with each other. If a gunman bursts into the church right now, what am I going to do? Do I know some secret martial arts and I'm going to flip over chairs and bounce off the walls and disarm them in an impressive display of martial prowess? Is that going to happen? I'm an overweight, out of shape officer. What is really going to happen if someone tries to do violence? What is the line? What is realistic? I'm serious. What's realistic? Okay, even if Jesus didn't say this, what is the likely outcome? Person breaks their arm with a gun. I go try to attack. Yay, heroic. What's most likely to happen? I'm going to get killed. I'm going to get shot. Now, a lot of it is not dependent on me. It's dependent on the shooter. Have they practiced? Do they know what they're doing? Have they shot people before? Is this the first time they've ever held a gun as well? It has nothing to do with me. Now, let's say I've got concealed carry, and I spend the money every month to go practice, and I pull the thing out, and pop my earplugs in, and calmly go pew, pew, pew. How much of my life needs to be dedicated to that to make that effective? Some of you guys do shoot. How much time does it take to do that? Let me ask, if I just go to the range once a year and practice, am I going to be pretty good at defending the building? Probably not. I'm not doing this to, I'm aware there's a whole thing about gun safety and Second Amendment rights. I'm not asking that. I'm asking practice. Let's look at this reason. I'm an overweight, out of shape officer. What am I actually going to do if violence occurs? So when Jesus says, do not resist an evil person, isn't that closer to reality? This isn't some idealized statement. This isn't some wonderful nirvana we're discussing. This is closer to reality. Now, I said, I know there are some of you here, you practice. You spend the time and the money, you do self-defense, and you work with, I'm aware of that. But I think you are even aware, is it the majority of Americans? The majority of Americans will go their entire life without facing one piece of violence. We are blessed to live in a land where most of us don't have to. Because it is such a peaceful land. So Jesus' direction here, I tell you not to resist an evil person. But look, for most of us, that's not hard to follow. Because that's what we do anyway. The vast majority of us, if the cop pulls us over, we're not speeding off. We're not shooting out their tires. It makes great Hollywood movies. We're not doing that for real. If the cop puts the lights on, what are you doing? Holding over and put my hands on the steering wheel so everyone sees what's going on. This is realistic. Let's continue with this. But I tell you not to resist the evil person. But whoever slaps you on the right cheek, turn him the other also. Okay, that's a big deal. If anyone wants to sue you, oh gosh, we just went through that. And take away your tunic, let him have your cloak. What? No, I need to get mine. What do you? That's not. Whoever compels you to go 1 mile, go with him too. Okay, that was a little bit. Not because the idea is the same. Please don't feel I'm changing anything. But that was something we may not experience. Someone slaps you on the right cheek, turn your, okay, we know what that is. We know about it. Someone sues you. Hey, you know they had lawyers back 2,000 years ago just like they do today. And they were just as loud 2,000 years ago as they are today. Whoever compels you, that word compels, believe it or not, that's not even a Greek word. That's actually a Persian word. The word is angreo. It's a carrier, a courier. One of the things that the Romans were allowed to do is when they were in occupied territory, Israel, being at the edge of the empire, was occupied. There were rebellions in Israel. They had to be put down. There was fighting in the Middle East, even 2,000 years ago. And the Romans were there to try to restore order. While the Roman soldiers were on campaign, they were allowed to have a native carry their pack for them. Now, It says a mile. If we convert to today's, it's about a half a mile. What we call a mile, it's about half a mile. But the soldier could make a native carry the pack for a half mile. The Roman society would do it. Beyond that, it actually would foster more rebellion. So they were limited. You could only force someone to carry your pack for one stadium. So maybe it's one stadium, 1,000 paces. But Jesus said, if that guy makes you carry his pack for one stadia, I want you to go two. That's odd, isn't it? What's Jesus say? Overcome it with love. I don't love this guy. He just made me do something I don't like. But they are occupying my country. They are doing violence on my people. Go with them too. We don't like that. We're fighters, we tell ourselves. No. Sorry, I'm not trying to prick your ego. But no. We haven't had to be. Now, some of you have had military experience, and I'm not dismissing what you've gone. The vast majority of us have lived very quiet. The most interesting things is going to be the drama at Thanksgiving or the shouting we're going to do today at the Super Bowl. And again, that's not an insult. That's just the reality we live in. This is the peaceful world that most of us have that God says we should have. I'm happy. This is a blessing from God. That we mostly live in a peaceful land where this sort of thing does not happen to us. When's the last time you got slapped by somebody? I hope it was a while ago. Please don't tell me it was this morning by your spouse. When is the last time someone sued you? Now, it can happen. I know there's business people in here. It does happen. I'm hoping it's not happening every week or every year. When's the last time forced conscription, a foreign army made you do something? My guess is these huge dramatic events don't happen all that often. But it's the next verse I want us to consider. Because when is the last time you could have been generous? Someone makes you go 1 mile, you go with them 2. When's the last time you could have been generous? If we read, keep going, Matthew 5:42. So Jesus just said, I tell you not to resist an evil person. It's the same pattern that Jesus has done in Matthew 5. You've heard it said of men of old, do not murder, but I tell you, and he goes to the whole thing, and the answer is, don't even be angry. Jesus said, you heard men of old, don't commit it. I tell you not even to look with lust. We have the same pattern here. You heard it said of old, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, no more. But I tell you, don't even resist an evil person. He went through all this, and then he says, give to him who asks of you. And from him who wants to borrow, do not turn away. When's the last time you could have been generous? When's the last time I could have been generous? We have a thing in our country. There are many good things we have. But there's an interesting thing we have. We don't like talking about how much money we make. I don't know why that is. If you go anywhere else in the world, that's not a thing. But here in America, we don't talk about how much money we make. It's not socially acceptable to do so. There are many reasons for it. I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a sociologist. That's not my area. But one of the reasons that we often don't talk about our money is we don't want someone asking it from us. Most of us have that relative. Some of us have two. Who they always want to borrow something. They want money. They need help. Jesus here says, in the same language of someone slapping you on the right cheek, of violence, someone wants to sue you, someone making you, forcing you. That same language, he who wants to borrow from you, do not turn away. Oh, we don't like that. God, he borrowed like he never returned. He always breaks my stuff. He never gives it. Give to him who asks it. I'm just not going to see him. That way he won't ask me. Please don't try to out-lawyer God. It doesn't well for us when we do that. which hopefully you've heard as we've been walking through Matthew 5. Don't try to find loopholes in the law. Give to him who asks it, and from him who wants to borrow, from you do not. What Jesus is setting up here is instead of responding with violence to violence, when someone is attacking you physically, emotionally, verbally, God wants us to bless in return. That's all. God says he wants us to love our enemies. And when he says love our enemies, that doesn't mean, oh, I'm neutral towards this person, so I don't have to do anything. Please don't try to outlaw your God. But to love your enemies. Matthew 5:4 says, but I say to you, love your enemies. It's in the very beginning, we're moving away from a whole bunch of don'ts, and now we're moving to do's. We've heard the don't murder, don't lust, don't get angry, don't do adultery. And now we're moving over to what we should be doing. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. I want you to be listening for the verbs that Jesus is telling us to be doing. Love your enemies. Bless those who curse you and do good. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. So we're told to love. Now, we got Valentine's Day coming. I have my personal opinion about Valentine's Day. I'll keep it to myself. But this Valentine's Day, how do we know that it's a good day? What actions do we see on Valentine's Day? She talks to you. That's wonderful. What are the actions that we chart and pay attention to on Valentine's Day?
We buy Hallmark cards.
We buy a bunch of cards. Hallmark makes lots of money on Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, and Christmas. Hallmark's one of three, I can put the stats up, one of the three biggest holidays. What are the other things that we can track for Valentine's Day that we know is a successful day? Flowers and candy. More flowers are sold on this day than any other. Dinner. Restaurants make a lot of money. Not as much as Mother's Day, but Valentine's Day is pretty high up on the list. Oh my goodness, you are so polite. There's an awful lot of November birthdays for Valentine's Day. I'm not trying to be gross or titillating. It's just, how do we know it was a successful day? These are the things we pay attention to. And I wasn't trying to be titillating. What I was pointing out is when we say love your enemies, often love for us is something we buy for somebody else or something we do with something else. That's often how people describe love. Did you go out to eat? Did you go have a date? Did you buy flowers? That's often. You love your enemy? Okay. That's not recorded, so you don't do that. So the phrase, when Jesus says, love your enemies, it is understandable. We get a little bit of confusion about it, because most of the time when we talk about it, we'll talk about love as either a gift or a shared activity. That's how we tell. Was Valentine's a good day? What did you get this year? What did you do this year? That's the common conversations about it. So let's look. Jesus continues. He doesn't just say, love your enemies. Bless those that curse you. When we talked last time that God is very careful to us, He gives us very careful directions about oaths, that we should stop cursing each other. God wants us to be blessing each other. Often, again, let's be honest, the world we live in, you tell how enthusiastic or energetic or how emotional somebody is by how many curses they put in front of the word. I won't practice. You heard it. I don't need to reinforce it. But you heard it. If they use one swear word, they think about it. But they've got 5 in there. Then they must really mean it. God tells us there's a better way, that we should be blessing. It caught me off guard. Where were we yesterday, Katrina? I think it was someplace around the door we walked in. And we're leaving, open the door, I hold the door for the other person. The other person, normally if they say anything, they say, thank you. This person said, God bless you. What? That was a normal thing. And it struck me as person is good. But it's like, that's not what you normally hear. You either hear thank you or you hear cursing when you're in public. And this person said, God bless you. Well, goodness, why are we doing that? Bless those. So instead of cursing other people, how about we start blessing them? Now, most of the time, let's be honest, when we use the word blessing somebody else, we generally mean, just like we talked about for Valentine's, we generally mean gifts. We generally mean money. Now, is that true? Yes, it's true. But there's more to it. Our words are your words blessing somebody else? Are your words blessing that other person when they're not present? Or you're not speaking? Our words should be blessing each other. So to love your enemies, what does it mean? Well, let's start with our words. Let's start blessing other people. Let's give blessings. May God bless you today. I guarantee you're going to get some funny looks. You start saying that. Because that's odd. We expect to hear cursing. We expect to hear complaining. We expect negative. God says we should be blessing each other. I got homework for you. When we're done with church today, share communion together and we have some fellowship time. Practice blessing each other. I don't know what it means any more than you do. I'm guessing too. We're going to do some fun practice. And if you don't know, try the blessing. God bless you. Okay, let's start with that. Let's see what that means. Let's discover this together, what God's talking about. Bless. Now we have the phrase, do good. Remember what the Jewish sensibility was of the word good. Sometimes that word good is used as a weapon. Do what is right. Do what is right or else. Remember what the word good meant in the Old Testament. It means beautiful. You're doing good for somebody. You're doing something beautiful for them. You're doing something wonderful for them. You remember these, and again, I like people drop their voice when they say it, but if there's something good, oh, that's the picture of the word good. That you're doing something for somebody else, that they go, oh, that they like it. It's beautiful. It's pretty. It's meaningful. So do good for others. Not something half-hearted, not something broken, but something that they'll go, oh. Something that makes their voice go, oh. You're doing good for somebody else. And then finally, pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute you. Warning! You pray for someone, it may change you. I know that for some reason that's why you don't pray as much as you should, because you're concerned what it's going to do to you. Again, I'm just trying to be honest. We sometimes don't pray because we're afraid of what God's going to do to us. I remind you, do not grow weary in doing good, that our God has your and my best interests at heart. And that if we do need to be changed, God does know what he's doing. He's been doing this for a long time. He's got some good experience. So here's where I will lead us. I'm going to read Matthew 5, 43 through 44, and there's really not much more I can add to it. I'd like for us to practice blessing each other today. That's why we gather as a group, to encourage each other to do good works, practice with each other. It's going to be awkward for all of us. That's okay. That's why we're practicing. Practice speaking blessing to each other today when we're done in church. So everyone don't scatter immediately. Take a little time. Practice blessings with each other. Do good for each other. Do something where their voice is going to drop. Oh. Do good. And pray. You have heard it was said, you shall love your neighbor and hate your enemy. But I say to you, love your enemies. Bless those who curse you. Do good to those who hate you. And pray for those who spitefully use you and persecute. I'm going to go ahead and pray, and then we're going to share communion together. Come on. Heavenly Father, we thank you for your word today. On the one hand, this was a simple message. Love our enemies. We understand what each word means. But Lord, it is a difficult message. We have had people who have hurt us. If we're older than 5 years old, we've had people who have bullied us, tortured us. Some of us bear the scars of sexual assault, of crime, of violence. Lord, we know these break your hearts. And that this violence grieves you. And that when we do violence, when people have done violence to us, Lord, we know it grieves you. We thank you for your blessings. We know you have blessed us. You have blessed us more than we can ever count or understand. Help us, Lord, to be more blessing to those around us. Be with us this morning as we share communion, another blessing that you have given us. Lord, in your name we pray. I remind you, the night in which Jesus was betrayed, when violence was going to be done on Jesus, he followed his own direction. He did not resist an evil person. He did not resist a group of evil people. But on the night in which he was betrayed, he took bread, broke it, gave it to his disciples, said, "Take and eat. This is my body broken for you." In the same manner, after supper, he took the cup and he blessed it. This is the pattern Jesus has set for us as well. For us to give blessings to others. He took the cup and he blessed it. Gave it to the disciples and said, "Take and drink. This is my new covenant." God is going to want to give you a new relationship with certain people in your life. You had a relationship with some of your family, your friends, your neighbors, the people you work with, that has been violent, that has been filled with anger and frustration. God has a new covenant. As often as you eat this bread and drink this cup, you proclaim the Lord's death until he comes. Come, the table is ready. Come, receive the blessing of the Lord.